Hi everyone! So today we are going to be talking about fertilizing our houseplants. Now this is a video that you guys have been asking me to do for quite some time. Honestly, I started kind of drafting it about a year ago, but there is just so much to cover when it comes to fertilizing. There are just so many different types of fertilizers out there that it kind of is a lot to try to put everything that I really need to tell you guys about fertilizers into one video. It would probably be like a 3-hour long video. So I've decided that I'm going to make a series of videos about fertilizing, and the one that we're going to start with today here is basically just kind of a fertilizing 101 video. We're going to talk about why we need to fertilize our plants, what kind of fertilizer options are out there, what are the pros and cons of the types of fertilizer options that are out there, how frequently should you be fertilizing, should you be diluting the fertilizer, all those good fun kinds of things. But real quick, just a reminder, so if you need to reference any part of this video again in the future, I will timestamp it below for you so you can get to the part that you need more quickly. But let's start off with, why do we need to fertilize our houseplants? I get a lot of questions from you guys about things involving houseplants, and you phrase it in the way of, but this doesn't happen in the wild. Plants don't get root rot in the wild, which is not true. Plants can get root rot in the wild, but that's for another video. But plants don't get fertilized in the wild unless a human is there to give them fertilizer. Well, that's not entirely true. So plants in the wild, you've got to remember there's other things living in the soil, worms, other types of bugs, animals above ground are doing their business on the ground, and scat, poop, all those good fun things have nutrients in them that then get incorporated into the soil and help to fertilize the plants. So it's a natural process out in the wild, but because we're growing plants in containers in our homes where they don't get exposed to all those kinds of things, eventually they're going to use up whatever nutrients are in the soil at the time that we pot them up. So we have to supplement the nutrients for them. Now, you guys might actually be a little bit shocked to hear that there are 13 nutrients that plants need for successful plant growth. The reason I say you guys might be shocked to hear that is because really, when we talk about fertilizers, when you go and you buy fertilizer at the store, there's only 3 that are just drastically shout out about on the labeling of fertilizers, and that is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, represented by their elemental symbols on the packaging as N, P, and K. Now, these are the 3 main ones, like they're the primary ones that the plants need. And what I mean by primary is they are needed in the largest quantities. However, there are a group of, I guess we could call it secondary ones that are needed in slightly less quantities, but are still super important. And we'll get into what these things do for the plants here in a second, why they're so important. But the 3 secondary most important ones are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Beyond that, everything else is considered a micronutrient and is needed in much lower quantities, but they still need them. So those are iron, zinc, I always mispronounce this one, molybdenum, I think is how it's pronounced, boron, copper, manganese, and chlorine. And yes, I said chlorine. Plants do need chlorine to survive. But let's talk about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium first. And I specifically want to explain before I forget what the numbers mean on the front of a fertilizer bottle when it says, for example, that the NPK is 10, 10, 10, or maybe it's 9, 3, 6, whatever it may be. What does that mean? All that those numbers mean, they're just the ratio of the quantity of those nutrients by weight of the solution in that bottle. It's a fancy way of saying it's 0.10 nitrogen, 0.10 phosphorus, 0.10 potassium, and then everything else in that bottle is filler. And we will get into what I mean by filler here in a bit. So that's what those numbers mean, and why that's important is some plants need higher levels of one of those than others, and a lot of that has to do with what the plant is being grown for. So for example, nitrogen actually is what helps promote green leafy plant growth. So if you have a plant that is not valued for fruit, flowers, or anything like that, if it's just valued for its beautiful green foliage, such as the Thamatophyllum bipinnatifidum back here, that kind of plant really needs to you need to make sure that it's getting enough nitrogen. So most plants like that, honestly, you guys, you can do just a balanced fertilizer when it comes to NPK, meaning that it would be the same number for all of those. So 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, whatever it may be. That usually will work well for those, but you don't particularly want to do one where the amount of nitrogen would be lower than the phosphorus or potassium. Now, I want to caution you about nitrogen and high levels of nitrogen in fertilizer for two reasons. One, if it is a plant that is actually valued for its flowers, having too high of a nitrogen content in your fertilizer can actually cause the flowers not to grow, kind of suppresses flower growth, if you will. Also, if you have variegated plants, too high a level of nitrogen can increase the amount of green in the plant and decrease the amount of variegation. So just keep that in mind. Now, phosphorus, on the other hand, is actually what helps to promote flower and fruit development in plants. So if you are growing a plant that is valued for its flowers, let's say, for example, African violets comes to mind, or orchids, you would want something with a little bit higher amount of phosphorus in it. And how much higher, you guys, depends on the plant. And I'm not going to get into it with like every single plant. Here's the best one for this. It's too much, you guys. It's too much. And to be honest with you, like I was saying a second ago, for most of your plants, like a balanced fertilizer where the number is the same for each of those is going to work just fine. However, if you really want like constant blooms going on a particular flowering type plant, then yes, you're going to need to get something specialized for that. And it should have a higher level of phosphorus in it. Now, same thing for like edible foods, because I mentioned fruits. So if you're growing, for example, tomatoes or something like that, same thing. They're going to need more phosphorus than just your plain leafy green plants. Now, when it comes to potassium, potassium actually is what helps plants to cope with stress. It helps increase disease resistance, just improves overall quality of health for the plants. So I guess you could call it like strength and immune support is kind of what potassium does for plants. So you really don't want to be having your plants get too deficient in potassium. And I'm going to save how to know if your plants are deficient or not in a particular nutrient for the next video in this fertilizer series of videos. Now, before we get into the secondary and micronutrients, I want to take a second to talk about the different types of fertilizer that are available on the market, because some of them will have those and some of them won't. And I want to explain to you afterwards what you need to do if you're using one that doesn't have them in it to make sure your plant is still getting the nutrients it needs. So let's start with, well, let me give you a precautionary thing here. There are a lot of different fertilizers out there, especially when it comes to the organic natural ones and methods that people use. This is not going to be an all-encompassing list, you guys. I am going to talk about the primary ones that a lot of people use. That does not mean that there are not other things you could be using as well. Feel free to comment down below and share with people different ones you use that have worked well for you too. Just help us all learn together. But I just want to cover the big ones, and I want to talk about kind of the pros and cons. So we're going to start with the organic natural ones. So compost obviously is a big one. All the emulsions, I like to call them, well, the sea emulsions basically. So you've got kelp emulsion, seaweed emulsion, fish emulsion. They're very popular. We've got worm castings. We also see liquid type fertilizers, which are labeled as plant food. That's another thing that you guys ask me a lot is like, what's the difference between plant food and fertilizer? Honestly, you guys, I looked into this and I kid you not, I'm pretty sure the only actual difference is that in order to put fertilizer on a label, you have to have a proven guaranteed analysis of what is in that fertilizer. Like you have to prove that it's actually a 10-10-10 mix of NPK. And so it could be that some of these that are just calling it plant food, maybe they didn't have the analysis done and they're just saying like it's approximately 10-10-10 or whatnot. I don't know. And then sometimes I think it's just a marketing thing because it sounds better if it's plant food, you're feeding your plant versus fertilizer, because some people have a negative connotation of like fertilizers as being chemical or whatnot. I don't know. But liquid dirt is one of the ones that is kind of, it's different. It still has your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in it. It's going to have other of those elements and nutrients that the plants need as well. But it has other things like alfalfa meal, blood meal. I mean, there's all kinds of things in that. These are all the types of things that plants could potentially be getting their nutrients from naturally in the wild, which sounds fabulous, right? Well, it's not without its pros and cons, so we'll get to that in a second. But then we have our inorganic ones, and this is what probably the majority of people use. This is what you can go easily just find at basically any kind of store. So for example, I do use this particular one here. And so within the organic fertilizer groupings. We have liquid inorganic fertilizers. We have granular inorganic fertilizers, and then we have what I will call stick style inorganic fertilizers. I prefer liquid, and I'll explain why in a bit, but this is what I use right here. I know you guys ask me a lot about it. Come on, camera. There we go. This is Bonide's liquid plant food. It is just a 10-10-10, and it does not have anything other than nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. Making sure that I'm reading that right. Yes, nothing else in it. Now, I have in the past also used a liquid-based fertilizer that does have added micronutrients in it, and that is Dynagrow Foliage Pro, and that is a 936 on the NPK, and this does include all of those other minerals and nutrients that I was describing to you. I'm just making sure. Okay, I take that back. It does not include every single one I just described to you, but it has most of them. I don't see, for example, sulfur. I don't see chlorine on here, but you guys, chlorine, you will get it into your plant's soil through your water, theoretically, depending on the type of water you're using. I might need to do a whole nother video like on this whole thing about chlorine being bad for your plants, chlorine in your water. Like, I think there's a little bit of confusion on types of chlorine and how they affect your plants, but we'll save that for a future video. You then have what I was saying before, our granular fertilizers. So this is actually Jack's All-Purpose 20-20-20 water-soluble plant food with micronutrients. So this does have the additional micronutrients in it. It does not have every single one. It has the same ones as the Dynagrow one here, so it doesn't have like sulfur, chlorine, whatnot, but it has the big ones that plants need. Now, this is little granules, and this is almost more of a powdered form, and I haven't opened this yet. Bought it recently to try out, because, oh my gosh, come on, camera. Because everybody in this area keeps talking about how well it works for their Monstera albos in particular, but hopefully you can see it's kind of a little powdery type form of fertilizer, and you just add that into your water and it dissolves into the water. Now, in addition to this, we have the slow release granular fertilizer, which is what you see a lot in plants when you bring them home from the store that's mixed into the soil, the little tiny balls that are in there floating around in the soil. And that is something that you combine into the soil, and then as you water over time, it is slowly released into the soil for the plant to take it up. Now, in addition to that, we have slow release sticks. This is like a just concentrated, I don't even know exactly, I can't think of what the terminology is right now. It's not heat packed, it's like compressed into stick form, basically taking something like this, compressing it into stick form. You stick that stick down into your soil, and then it's the same basic concept is over time as you water, it releases those nutrients into the soil so that your plant can uptake the nutrients. So what are the pros and cons of these? I want to start with the organic fertilizers first, because there's some pretty big cons that I think a lot of people don't realize and maybe don't talk about. And it's not to say that it's always going to happen, but there's an increased likelihood of pests. There's an increased likelihood of mold. That is because these are organic things. They are alive, if you will. They are not like synthetic. Like, this does not have something that is going to attract pests. Worm castings will attract pests, you guys. It's worm poop. Flies, in particular, are attracted to pretty much all kinds of poop. So therefore, you're going to have an increased likelihood of pests being attracted to your plants if you're using that kind of stuff mixed into the soil. That is really the biggest con with organics. But another thing, so of course, obviously then a pro for using the inorganics is you don't have that issue. And then mold, obviously, because everything is kind of alive and whatnot, that also creates a perfect growing ground for mold. Now, another con to using organics, and on the flip side, a pro to using inorganics, is the numbers are way higher. Like the NPK numbers are going to be way higher on your synthetics, inorganics here, than they are in your organics, because when you're producing inorganics synthetically in like a lab, you can do them in more concentrated doses. So a little goes a long way, versus when you're using inorganic, you're going to have to use a lot more worm castings, a lot more fish emulsion, whatever you're using to get the level, the quantities of the nutritional values that you need into your plants than you would using something like this. So just keep that in mind. Now, another thing I want to talk about is that I mentioned earlier is fillers. So one of the things that is kind of a pro to this granular versus the already mixed in liquid form fertilizer here is that this has filler in it. So you're paying for your nutritional value that's in this, the NPK that's in this, and probably water, I'm assuming is what it is. It is filled with, it's not a word, filled with. It doesn't say, I don't think. I guess they aren't required to say what the rest of it is made up of, but once again, my guess here is water. So you're getting more bang for your buck, I guess, with this one because you have it concentrated and you can mix it into your water yourself and you're not having to pay for water already in the bottle. So I'm pretty sure right now some of you are wondering, well, that's a lot. There's a lot of different options out there. What do I recommend that you use? Like, what's the best to use? And then some of you are probably going, wait a minute, if there's all these fertilizers out there in the market like this that just have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in them, how is my plant ever getting all of the nutrients it needs? Since I told you there's basically 13 nutrients that it really needs to be able to really grow properly. Well, that is where a little something called CalMag comes in. So CalMag is a supplement to provide those additional nutrients to your plant if you are using a solely NPK style fertilizer. So looking at this, this does have nitrogen in it as well. It's just a 4%. So it does have an NPK value on the front here. Hopefully you guys can see that, 400. So there is no phosphorus or potassium in here, and there is a slight amount of nitrogen. So keep in mind that if you are using, just like shook it a little bit and splashed some, I guess that was caught in the threads of the cap, out on my arm. 1 second, you guys. Okay, got cleaned up. Was not expecting that. Back to what I was saying. So this does have a little bit of nitrogen in it. So if you are using CalMag in addition to another type of liquid fertilizer, just be mindful that, for example, this is a 10-10-10, but technically if I'm using this in conjunction with CalMag, my plants are going to be getting a little bit higher levels of nitrogen than phosphorus and potassium because you have to take into account the nitrogen that's in the CalMag. But in addition to that, there is calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, zinc, boron, copper, and sulfur. And part of the reason, you guys, that I started using this recently was because, as I had mentioned to you guys, I had discovered that the pH in the soil that my Calathea freddie is in is a little bit alkaline, and I need to get it to be more acidic, and sulfur will assist with that. So I thought I might just try supplementing with CalMag first to see how it goes, and I am happy to report that Fred is finally pushing out a bunch of new leaves. So fingers crossed, the CalMag is what is helping with that. So I know this kind of seems like, well, this might be a lot. Why do I gotta buy two things when I could just buy the one thing over here or this one over here, which honestly, I would probably recommend, especially if you're new to houseplants, I would probably recommend just doing this first because, like I said, all-purpose, like same number, this one's 20-20-20, same number is a really good place to start. You don't really need to be like super like, okay, dialed in, I got this plant needs like a 3-9-5 and this one needs a whatever. It will do fine. Your plants will do fine just with an all-purpose one, but it's for people who are really growing them for specific purposes. And really, if somebody's trying to enter plants in a show, for example, and they really want to dial in that nutrition to get that plant to be like as perfect as possible, then yes, you're going to need to dial it in. And once again, if it is like a flowering plant prized for flowers, then you want to go, it'll be fine with an all-purpose, but you really would prefer to go with something with a slightly higher level of phosphorus. I have no clue, honestly, you guys, why Dynagrow does not make their standard. This is like what they promote as their all-purpose for indoor plants. I don't know why it's not a balanced fertilizer. It is a 936, not 100% certain why. I have heard a lot of people like have said that they love this fertilizer, which is why I originally tried it. I honestly, you guys, did not see a huge difference between using this and just the regular 10-10-10, just NPK over here. I honestly have not started supplementing with other nutrients such as CalMag until about 6 months ago, I guess. I was before that trading off between doing these two. And I'll explain here in a bit like how often fertilize and do you need to dilute it and all those other good fun things. But this is basically what I have come to the conclusion of I like the Bonide 10-10-10 here, and I like this CalMag together. Now, somebody's probably thinking or shouting at the screen right now, well, isn't that what this is? And basically, yes, with the exception of that this does not have the sulfur in it. And because I do have a couple of plants where my soil, for whatever reason, you guys, because it's the same soil I use for other plants, I don't know why, but I have a few that are sitting slightly too alkaline. And so I know the addition of that sulfur is going to help. So that is why I have chosen what I have chosen. If you're not in a position where your soils are slightly too alkaline, then you don't have that problem, then maybe go with this. But this is why I'm trying to say, I can tell you what I use, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that's going to work, you guys. Lots of people use different types of fertilizers. You just kind of have to find what's right for you and your plants. I'm just trying to give you a basic understanding here of how fertilizers work and understanding the numbers and everything so that you can make the best decision for your exact situation. Oh, and before I forget, about flowering plants also, they typically need a higher level of calcium and magnesium. So for flowering plants, CalMag would definitely be a good thing to supplement with as well. But the next thing I want to talk about is the importance of water when it comes to fertilizing your plants. So everything I've described to you requires water in some form or fashion to be able to present these nutrients to the plant in a way that they can uptake the nutrients. So that's why everything has to be water soluble. It has to be able to dissolve in the water. And this is why there are also some pros and cons to the granular fertilizers in particular. Now, not this one because you're actually going to mix this into your watering can, but the slow release granular fertilizer, you really have to get it just right, you guys. It has to be incorporated into the soil. It's not something you can just sprinkle on top of the soil or just mix it in a little bit on the top of the soil. It's not going to work. And part of the reason it won't work is because nitrogen behaves a little bit interestingly. So it can evaporate off. So when that gets watered and it's released and it's sitting on top of the soil, parts of those nutrients can just evaporate off and then they never get down near the roots and the roots never get the nutrients. Now, my big question with the sticks, it's not spread throughout the soil. Like a stick is just stuck in there. And I feel like when the water like dissolves part of it, it's just staying concentrated in one area. And I honestly would be slightly concerned about that setting you up for a potential fertilizer burn situation. I honestly, that is like the number one thing that I probably would be like, maybe don't do that one. There's plenty of better options than those stick fertilizers. It's just my opinion. Now, as far as mixing up your own liquid fertilizers or using a liquid fertilizer, just directly adding liquid fertilizer into your watering can, when you guys are doing this, and I am 100% guilty of not doing what I'm about to tell you, and I'm trying to get better, you guys are probably, like me, comment down below and let me know if you are or not. I like mix it into my watering can and I immediately start watering my plants. It's probably not the best idea, you guys. You probably need to give it at least like 10 minutes of sitting there to like really fully incorporate into the water before you go watering your plants. Now, have I ever had a massive problem from doing that? No. But would it perhaps deliver the nutrition better to my plants if I did let it sit? Yes. So I really feel like it will only take about 10 minutes. Obviously, the longer you leave it there, the more it will incorporate, the better it will be. But also keep in mind that a lot of fertilizers, once you mix them into your water, they aren't going to stay good for a long period of time, right? You have a certain amount of time in which you really need to use them up. So just be mindful of that, especially if you're somebody who typically likes to mix up a lot to just have on hand. Just make sure you're using it up over the course of like a few days. Some fertilizers I've seen, they advertised you can have it mixed up and it's good for like a week. I don't know. I just don't like to run the risk. I really just recommend trying to use it up within a few days. It's just my 2 cents. Now, another thing that I think a lot of people don't think about is there is an interplay of elements in the soil want nutrients as well. So everything's got like an electron charge and a proton charge without getting too much into the science for you. And those electrons and protons, you know, are pulled to each other. So when we put a nutrient solution, water with our watering can with this added into it, for example, we put that into the soil. If the soil is missing that, it will try to pull those things to it, and the roots will simultaneously be wanting to pull it this way. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that water, while water is a carrier delivering all these nutrients to the soil and to the roots, water is also a conductor of electricity, don't forget. So lots of times if you have bone dry soil and you go to water it with your fertilizer mixture, you're going to have problems. Like, it's not going to want to go to the roots because there's just this whole interplay of the electrons and everything due to the fact that the soil is bone dry. Like I said, the science is going to bore you, but basically what you guys need to know is it's not really advisable to directly water bone dry soil with your fertilizer mixture. What you want to do is wet the soil down first and then add the mixture. So for example, yesterday I was fertilizing plants. I let my Syndapsis argyrius get a little bit too dried out. The plant was fine. It wasn't like droopy leaves or anything like that, but it was dry, you guys. So instead of just watering it with the fertilizer water first, I ran it under the faucet in the sink and got it completely soaked down, let all the regular water drain through, and then I watered it with my fertilizer water so that it incorporates better. It can be more quickly and easily delivered to the roots so the plant can get the nutrients that it needs more immediately, basically. So let's talk now about how often to fertilize. And I'm going to be straight up honest with you guys. There's no right answer to this question. Once again, this is just something that everybody does it a little differently. Honestly, I even do it a little bit differently now than I used to do it when I first got into plants. Not because what I was doing when I first got into plants wasn't working. It just evolved over time, and this is what I do now. But let's just talk about some of the main ways that people tend to fertilize in terms of frequency. So first of all, the number one rule that I will say holds true for every type of fertilizing schedule, whatever you decide to do, is as long as your plants are actively growing, they need to be fertilized. So you probably heard people say before, you shouldn't be fertilizing in the winter. No, it's not true. As long as your plants are growing, remember, they're indoors, they're not outdoors, they don't know it's winter per se. So as long as your plants are actively growing, you need to be giving them fertilizer. I kind of like to use the analogy of like a hibernating bear. If a bear is not hibernating, it needs food to survive. If it does go into hibernation in the winter, then no, it doesn't eat. So what is the equivalent of your plant going into hibernation? Well, that is if your plant goes dormant. So for example, alocasia is a good one. I honestly have never had an alocasia go dormant inside of my house, but I know some of you guys have. Lots of times alocasia, well, we'll talk about it in the wild though. Like outdoors, alocasia will die back if there's a freeze, and they won't come back until in the spring when it warms up again. And they store food in the form of carbohydrates and sugars and whatnot in the corms that they grow from underground. And so that's kind of like the hibernating bear situation. It has food stores and it gets it through the winter, and then it uses those food stores to start growing again. And once it starts using those food stores, it depletes them, and then you need to start giving it food again. I hope that makes sense. Best analogy I could come up with, you guys. But beyond that, a lot of people nowadays do what they call watering weekly. Weekly meaning not strong, and then second weekly meaning every week. Now, I also want to caution you here, when we say weekly, we don't literally mean you should be watering every plant every week. I don't know why. I guess because watering weekly sounded catchy. That's why people say it. But you want to only be watering your plants when they need to be watered. And as we all know, like I have plants, like my ZZ plant gets watered once this time of year, once every 3 months. So it's not getting watered weekly. It's not getting fertilized weekly. But what they mean is when they say water weekly is every time that they need to water a plant, regardless of how long they go in between watering it, they will use a diluted amount of fertilizer and water that plant. I personally do not like to fertilize every single time I water because I feel like you need a flush at some point, because all of those minerals, they leave deposits in the soil. They don't all get used up. There are like salts involved in your fertilizers, and the salt deposits build up in the soil. And if you aren't doing a flush occasionally, that can cause problems. So I personally prefer not to do back-to-back fertilizations. I like to skip at least one in between. So if I water this plant back here this week and I need to water it next week, I'll give it fertilizer this week. I won't give it fertilizer the next week. And then I'll pick back up with fertilizer the following week, and so on and so forth. I find that that has worked well for me. Now, some people just never do flushes. That's fine as well. A lot of people will only do like once a month. So if they water their plant 4 times a month, they will fertilize it one of those waterings. It just kind of, like I said, depends on the person, you guys. I just like to caution people I really think it helps to have a flush here or there. Now, if you're probably wondering, so if I am going to fertilize more frequently, should I be diluting my fertilizer like I just described? Honestly, you guys, I don't know. I do know where this came from. So this is something that's been, for as long as I've been in houseplants, people always said, don't do what it says on the bottle, dilute it. Why? Like, these people who make this should know how much you need to use and it be safe for your plants. And they even put on here, for example, this says, ideal for feeding all your houseplants each time you water. If you do that, mix 1/8 of a teaspoon into 1 quart of water. Then it says, however, if you feed your houseplants once or twice a month, use 1/4 of a teaspoon per quart of water. Like, it's doing the math for you to make sure it's safe. So why does everybody always say to dilute it? Well, I think that goes back to the old adage of better safe than sorry, because just like we always say, overwatering is way worse for your plants than underwatering, because overwatering is more likely to kill your plant because it will develop root rot, roots will rot off, versus underwatering, a lot of plants can bounce back from more easily. So same thing here. Over-fertilizing is way worse than under-fertilizing, and I think that's why a lot of people just preach dilute it. I honestly, you guys, don't dilute it. I do exactly what it says on the packaging here, and I've never had a problem. But if you're worried that you're going to somehow overdo it, then by all means dilute it. I should also point out, I just said I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem following the instructions and using this one. If you're new here and are unaware, I did have a accidental fertilizer burn situation a few months back that actually was related to this one right here. It was not anything particular that I did. It had to do with how old this fertilizer was, and if you want to learn more about that, I will link that video down below in the description for you. But fertilizer burn is what can happen if you accidentally over-fertilize, so if you are concerned, then by all means, go ahead and dilute it. Just keep in mind that you may find, though, that you need to fertilize more frequently. Now, also, I want to talk about like types of plants, because some plants naturally are going to be what we refer to as heavier feeders than others, meaning that they're going to need more fertilizer. And it's kind of not how you would think, you guys. I think this messes with some people's minds. So you might think a plant's growing slow. I need to give it some more fertilizer. That'll help speed up and boost the growth. It's not actually the case, you guys. It's very interesting. So faster growers need to be fertilized more frequently. Why? Because they're running through their food stores faster than a naturally slower growing plant. It's kind of like the whole teenage boys eating their parents out of their home because they're just hungry all the time, because they're burning through so much energy. They're growing super fast. They're going through crazy growth spurts, and their body's just using up the energy that from the food they're consuming so fast because they're going through such rapid growth phases that they need to eat more, versus a 18-year-old who's pretty much stopped growing no longer needs as much nutrients and food intake to be able to sustain itself because its body's not undergoing all of those rapid growth changes. I hope that makes sense. So really, your slower growing plants, you don't need to fertilize as frequently. Now, another thing to keep in mind is succulents and succulent-like plants. They also don't need to be fertilized as frequently because they are storing a lot of that water and the associated fertilizer in it in those succulent-like leaves, stems, and other various structures on the plant. So they've got extra stores of them. So for my succulents, for example, I fertilize once a quarter for my really truly succulent plants. Now my ones that are kind of semi-succulent, I probably do like every other month on those. So for example, like my string of bananas, string of pearls, like those are succulent plants, but they don't have as large of structures that they're storing water in. For example, like my Echeveria has got giant succulent leaves. That one I will only do once a quarter, but the ones that have the smaller like semi-succulent leaves I will do like once a month. But like I was saying, you guys, this is just a basic overview of houseplant fertilization to better educate you and make you prepared to figure out what's best for you. And I kind of touched on this briefly earlier, but the pH of your soil and whether it is overly alkaline, overly acidic, or hopefully just right is going to play not only a huge role in how you fertilize, but a huge role in whether or not your plants can actually use the fertilizer that you're giving them. And if you'd like to learn more about that, then you can check this video out next. Thanks so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!